every few months, the same debate seems to resurface. AAA gaming is dead, indies are saving the industry, big publishers are killing creativity, and small developers seem to be the future. And every time it comes back, it feels convincing. A massive AAA title launches, buggy or unfinished, and suddenly it becomes proof that corporate scale has hollowed out creativity. Then, a small indie game releases with originality and heart, and it becomes the counterexample, proof that real artistry only exists outside the system. Sometimes it feels like a battle, like one side has to win for the other to lose. But the more you zoom out, the less that framing makes complete sense, because the gaming industry doesn't function like a battlefield, it functions like an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't thrive when one half disappears. They thrive because of tension, because of contrast, because risk and stability exist at the same time. If we actually want to understand where gaming is heading, we have to stop treating indie and AAA like enemies. They're not. They're evolutionary partners. Hey guys, how's it going? I've got a good one for you today, so sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Coming to you live on location from the internet, this is Custom by Cody, and I'm Cody. We, as humans, love clean narratives. We like heroes, we like villains. It's easier to say AAA bad, indie good, than it is to think about development pipelines, staffing costs, engine licensing, market budgets, localization requirements, and investor expectations. When a big release disappoints, it seems emotionally satisfying to point at an out-of-touch executive or publisher and say, right there, that's the problem. When a tiny indie team succeeds, it feels like justice, like the underdog has won. But emotionally satisfying stories are not always structurally accurate ones. AAA studios and indie developers don't just differ creatively, they operate under entirely different constraints. They have different timelines, different risk tolerances, different financial pressures, and different audience expectations. And those constraints shape outcomes long before a game ever reaches its players. If we judge only the final product, we miss the invisible system shaping it. So instead of picking a side, let's slow down and examine the ecosystem itself. Because once you understand the system, the rivalry starts to feel incomplete. Innovation rarely begins where failure is catastrophic. It begins where failure is survivable. That's the structural reason so many new genres and mechanics originate from smaller teams. If you're a 5-person indie studio and your idea doesn't work, that can be devastating, but it doesn't destabilize an international corporation. You can pivot, you can rework your systems, you can experiment mid-development. That flexibility is not about moral purity, it's about agility. For example, take Minecraft. Before it became a cultural phenomenon, it looked rough. Minimal textures, limited presentation, no cinematic polish, but it introduced something powerful: freedom. Players weren't just completing objectives, they were shaping their own experiences and building their own world. That kind of design doesn't usually come from committees. It comes from exploration, or Slay the Spire. A deck-building roguelike hybrid sounds very niche, but a small team could iterate quickly, adjust balance daily, refine based on player feedback in real time. The idea didn't need to justify itself to layers of stakeholders. It just needed to work. How about Undertale? A small indie title that challenged long-standing RPG assumptions about violence and choice. It asked players to rethink mechanics that had been normalized for decades. That kind of subversion is easier to attempt when approval pipelines are short. Indies can afford to be strange. They can afford to be polarizing. They can afford to deeply resonate with a very specific audience rather than appealing broadly. But here's the part that rarely gets discussed. Most indie games fail, and they fail quietly. Digital storefronts are filled with creative projects that never found visibility. Discoverability algorithms reward momentum, not necessarily innovation. For every breakout success, there are thousands that never reached critical mass. Indie innovation is chaotic. It's high variance. It burns through ideas at a rapid rate. But that churn at the edges is essential. Without it, genres and mechanics don't evolve. Design language ossifies. Indies act as the experimental frontier. But experimentation alone doesn't shift the center of the industry. For that, something else has to happen. There's a moment in the life cycle of almost every successful game mechanic. It starts at the edge, it gains a niche audience, it proves it works, and then it moves inward. A larger studio adopts it, they refine it a little, and they scale it. And this is where the debate usually becomes heated, because AAA adopts ideas that began small. Some players see it as validation, others see it as copying. But was it copied, or did it evolve? When an idea moves from the fringe to the mainstream, it changes. It becomes more accessible, often more polished, sometimes less risky. And to players who loved the raw version, that shift can feel like dilution. But without that movement from the edge to the center, innovation stays niche. It doesn't influence the broader medium. That friction between experimentation and infrastructure, this is where AAA enters the picture. If indies are research labs, AAA studios are infrastructure. They don't just test ideas, they normalize them. They bring them to a global scale. When a mechanic is refined at AAA scale, it becomes stable, predictable, and accessible. That stability changes players' expectations. Take Battle Royale. Those mechanics existed before they became dominant. But when large studios refine matchmaking systems, performance stability, cross-platform integration, and live service structures, the genre became globally accessible. That industrialization really matters, because once something reaches that level of polish, players expect that polish everywhere. The same thing happens with open world design. It's not just about having a big map, it's about system density, narrative layering, voice acting, accessibility settings, global localization. Those elements require massive coordination. Hundreds of developers, large QA departments, cinematic teams, marketing infrastructure. AAA studios move slowly because they are complex machines. But when they execute successfully, they don't just create games, they create new baselines. And that baseline influences everyone, including indies. But scale comes with its own trade-offs. And those trade-offs introduce pressure. AAA development is extraordinarily expensive. Budgets that can rival blockbuster films. When that much capital is involved, predictability becomes valuable. From the outside, sequels and franchises can look like creative stagnation. From the inside, the risk management. Stability, it can protect jobs. It keeps studios operational. But indie development isn't a creative paradise either. Indies face a different kind of instability. Financial insecurity, algorithm dependence, market invisibility, burnout. If a AAA game underperforms, the consequences are loud. Layoffs, restructures, public scrutiny. If an indie game underperforms, the consequences are more quiet. Savings drained, a team dissolves, projects abandoned. Both models are fragile, just in very different ways. AAA fears catastrophic loss at scale. Indies fear disappearing entirely. When players criticize one side without understanding those pressure, it flattens a complex reality into a moral argument. But this isn't morality, it's economics meeting creativity. And this is the part where I had to check my own thinking, because it's easy to criticize from the outside. It's easy to look at a delayed AAA game and say, they had hundreds of good people, what went wrong? It's easy to look at a struggling indie release and say, well, maybe it just wasn't good enough. The more I pay attention to the games industry and how games are actually made, the more I follow developer interviews, postmortems, layoffs, funding struggles, the harder it becomes to reduce this conversation to winners and losers. Behind every AAA delay are teams crunching to hit impossible expectations. Behind every indie success story are years of uncertainty that we never see. As players, we experience the finished product. We rarely experience the cost. And I think that distance makes it easier for us to oversimplify the conversation. When you zoom in on the human side of it, the developers, the artists, the programmers, the rivalry narrative starts to feel less dramatic and more disconnected from reality. That shift in perspective changed how I looked at the industry. And both sides are navigating that tension constantly. The industry doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in cycles. Indie experimentation creates variation. AAA refinement creates stability. Then indie developers respond to that stability with new mutations. The loop is experimentation, followed by adoption that leads to normalization, which sets the stage for further mutation. That loop has been repeated for decades, but the stakes are increasing now. Budgets are ballooning and development cycles are lengthening. At the same time, development tools are more accessible than ever before. More creators can experiment, but competition is much more fierce. The gap feels wider, but the interdependence hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's intensified. If AAA budgets continue to rise, risk tolerance may shrink further. If indie markets become oversaturated, visibility may become even more competitive. Both sides may need each other more than ever. Without indies pushing boundaries, AAA stagnates. Without AAA scaling ideas, innovation remains niche. The healthiest version of gaming is not where a single philosophy dominates. It's one where risk and refinement exist in constant tension. That tension is uncomfortable, but it's productive. It's how mediums evolve. We are in a strange time for gaming at the moment. The industry is not indie versus AAA. It's indie feeding experimentation into the ecosystem. It's AAA amplifying proven ideas to a global audience. If one side dominates completely, something is lost. If AAA becomes so risk-averse that innovation disappears, the industry will stagnate. If indie development becomes so financially unstable that experimentation isn't sustainable, the frontier will collapse. We don't need one side to win. We need both sides to survive. Because what makes gaming special isn't just scale, and it isn't just experimentation. It's the moment between the two. It's watching an idea start small, rough and uncertain, and then seeing it grow, seeing it refine, and seeing it influence millions. That journey from edge to center is what makes the medium feel alive. If that loop breaks, gaming doesn't die dramatically. It slowly becomes predictable, and that predictability is a real threat to creativity. So maybe the next time the internet declares AAA dead, or declares that indies are the only hope, we pause, we zoom out, and we ask a better question. Is the gaming ecosystem still evolving? Because as long as ideas are still moving from small teams to global stages, as long as risk and refinement are still in tension, gaming isn't dying, it's adapting, and adaptation is how creative industries survive. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing: fun video games. That's going to do it for me today, everyone. I am genuinely curious where you stand on this topic. Do you think the balance is healthy right now, or do you think one side is starting to outweigh the other? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this deeper industry breakdown, hit the like button. It genuinely helps. And if you enjoyed conversations like this, there are a lot more on the way, so consider subscribing. Now, go play something fun. Take care of yourself. This is Custom by Cody. I'm Cody. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.